Afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. I'm Stuart Schaefer, the chair of the P&G Alumni Cincinnati chapter, and today's webinar is how P&G and Apple won with superior products. And I think it's going to be a really interesting event. I want to introduce our guests. First is Gordon Brunner. Gordon was at P&G from 1961 to 2000. He rose to the rank of Chief Technology Officer by the 1990s, and also was on the board of the directors for Procter & Gamble in the 1990s, the only R&D person to ever sit on P&G's board. He's the author of Superior Products, a winning strategy demanding game-changing innovation. And to just give you some idea of the contribution for Superior Products in the 90s, P&G's total shareholder return during every year for 10 years was about 22% per year for 10 years. That's 660% return for 10 years for Procter & Gamble in the 90s. Amazing. There were lots of things going on, but Superior Products were clearly a big part of the picture. I also wanted to introduce Jay Elliott. Jay was the Senior Vice President of Apple from 1981 to 1987. He came from IBM, of all places, and was there for the early building and launch of the Macintosh. He has had a long career in technology and entrepreneurship, including his latest startup. Importantly, he's the author of The Steve Jobs Way, iLeadership for a New Generation. I met these two individually, and in chatting with them, realized that when it comes to innovation, they were saying very similar things. And that was the genesis for today's webinar. With that, I want to let's get started with some conversation. So Gordon, if we could start with you. In your book, you say that great brands begin with great products. For an audience of the ex-P&G leaders and others, what's the cleanest business case that product superiority produced at Procter & Gamble? Just to kind of give us a sense for how big is big.
Well, let me say that the prime example of the importance of a product and innovation is the contrast between Tide and Ivory. Ivory is 145 years old. It was a number one brand for 100 years. It had really no competition. It was premium price, led the market. Then in the 1960s, competition came in with some milder products. At that time, Ivory started losing share. Contrast that with Tide. Tide was 45 years old. It's been constantly innovated all those years since that time. It's a leading brand. It keeps growing. It's innovated more than 100 times. Well, when you look at those two brands, Tide, over its history, has continued to grow, innovating all the time. Ivory, on the other hand, the company decided it wasn't going to change the product. It's an iconic brand, Ivory special, and so the decision was made not to innovate on Ivory all those years. Well, Ivory over those years has continued to drop, and today is basically out of business. So there's no greater contrast in the strength of a product and the importance of continued innovation.
Fantastic, thanks. Well, and also Jay, I want to get you in here, but before I ask you the business questions, you came from IBM to Apple. You want to tell folks how in the world did that happen?
That was an interesting opportunity. So there's a system called BART, which is called Bay Area Rapid Transit System, came to IBM and said, we want a way that a customer can get a ticket for our system without, putting money in a terminal. So we built a way you could put money in a terminal and get a ticket out. And while I was demoing that product to some salespeople, one of them was from Bank of America, and they said, could you do it the other way? Could you put a ticket in and get money out? I said, yeah, but you'd only have to have like one $20 bill. So we said, could you build a prototype? So I built a prototype and we put it in the Bank of America lobby. It went great. People loved it. Well, it's an ATM system. So we actually filed a patent for it. And actually, I went to IBM headquarters and said, hey, there's a great business here. And I think we can have an ATM in every bank in the world. And so I put together a business plan and they rejected the idea. They said, no, we're just going to be in computers. And so while I was flying back from New York back to California, I said to myself, I'm really in the wrong company. And I was meeting a friend of mine at a restaurant to talk about what I needed to do to leave IBM. At that time, IBM was 80% of the market. So where do you go? And we're going to talk about what I could do. And I was sitting in the lobby drinking a margarita, waiting for dinner. And a young guy sat next to me, a very hippie-looking guy, and he said, I was dressed in my IBM suit, blue suit, white shirt, and tie. And he said, "What do you do?" And I said, "Oh, I work for IBM in computer industry." And he said, "Well, I have a new company and I have a new product. It's called Apple." And he said, "I would be interested in talking to you." I said, "Well, I'm not really interested in talking to you." And I would really wanted not. The guy was very hippie looking. I didn't really want to talk to him. And we kept talking. Eventually, got to a point, and he said, "I really like you to come to work for me." I said, "Well, I don't think you can afford me." And obviously, at that time, didn't realize that he was already worth about $400 million. Apple had already just had gone public the year before. So obviously, I didn't know that in those days. And so he said, "What would it take for me to hire you?" I said, "I love Porsches. Buy me a new Porsche, and you get my attention." And so when he and Steve Wozniak were leaving the restaurant, I was talking to my friend. We were laughing about this conversation I had and with my friend, and he said, and Steve Wozniak and him were walking by, and Steve stopped and said, "What color do you want?" I said, "Red." About 2 weeks later, my wife called me and said, "What the hell are you doing buying a new Porsche?" And I said, "I didn't buy a new Porsche." He said, "Well, when was this delivered to you?" So I called Steve and said, "You got my attention," and accepted a job. By the way, that afternoon, he said, "I want to show you something." We jumped in his car and flew up to a place called Xerox Park and saw a thing called a mouse. And when we left that place, Steve held up his index finger and said, "This is going to change the world." Think where we are today, where the mouse technology, display stuff is still relevant. Anyway, that's how I met Steve. Now how I got the job.
Wow.
It,
That's amazing. Well, Steve had a lot of people on this call know Steve as a master marketer, but would you describe him as a master marketer first or a product leader who understood great products and was good at storytelling?
Product first, absolutely. The product was it. I mean, if you think about, he was the best. He was the number one user of the product. And you think about it, he built a product for himself. He didn't build it, but he as a user represented the product. And really, that's really what. But you're right. He was a great storyteller, but it was about the product. And that's one thing that Steve really brought to the company and brought to the organization. You had to be product first, and you had to be really, everybody who worked there had to have as much passion for the product as he did. And I have to say the word passion is very important because that was Steve. Even the mouse, think about it. We developed the mouse, saw it in 81, but actually introduced it in 85 with the Macintosh. Nobody did anything. The mouse was available for everybody and nobody did anything with it. So it's like he really understood how to use the product, and because he was so connected to the product. So product is number one by far.
And and so the question is, how does an organization get a product first mentality? Gordon, you want to how did P&G answer that question?
How does P&G get a product?
How do they get a culture of product superiority?
Well, you have to realize Procter& Gamble is 186 years old, and it's had the same strategy for 186 years. That is, we're going to produce superior consumer products that's seen by the consumer that are better than anything else. And that's driven the company all those years. Now, it can go up and down in terms of importance and so on, and it takes leadership from the company to keep that in focus for the organization. But Procter& Gamble has had a strategy of superior products as its way to succeed. And so it's just that's the way it is. And of course, over that time, you have the history where you see the importance of superior products in the marketplace. If you're ahead of competition at Procter& Gamble, you're winning. You're behind competition, your share is going down. And so that's what drives the company onward. It's the culture.
In your book, you had a unique relationship with CEO John Pepper in the 90s. And you talk about what that partnership means. Do you want to tell us more about the role of the CEO in a product superior company?
Well, in my view, for a company to be innovative, it's got to be led by the CEO. Innovation is tough. It's not something that a lot of guys choose to develop really big, innovative products. It's risky, And so you've got to put into your organization that this is what we have to succeed. You've got to demand it. You've got to support it. You've got to make sure it's got the resources in order to accomplish what you're trying to do. But it has to be driven by the CEO. And over my career, I worked for 4 CEOs, all different, but all extremely supportive and demanding of superior products. And that was essential. And hopefully that will never lose Procter and Gamble's focus.
So Jay, you know Steve Jobs, and he's famous for being a leader with his own opinions, and sometimes more so than a leader's opinions over consensus. When is that an advantage, and when could that possibly be dangerous?
Well, I think it's an advantage. What the term Gordon used was culture, and that really the advantage of having a leader that's so is really the culture, and that's really what Steve brought to it. Was we created a culture really around Steve and his prioritization, but he really was a leader user. He was the number one user in the world, but the culture is really critical, and also, but it does have. You're right. It does have. You can run it. I'll tell you an example. The Macintosh, when it was introduced, was a failure. People never remember that, but it was. The reason for it, it didn't have a hard drive. And Steve would not, I mean, this was an argument that I had with Steve that I couldn't win. He was the reason for it is he thought IBM was going to bring a product to market before he did. So, which was wrong, and they never did. But he was so caught up in that term that he just got his leadership went the wrong direction. And so Mac was a failure. That's why it cost him his job at Apple. And so the leader has to be really focused and make sure that input information. And the other thing Gordon talked about is CEO being dominant, but you also have to have the people around him, the leadership with them are on the same plane, because it's not just the CEO. It has to be the whole leadership, and it has to be the culture. And that's and Steve was really very important about that whole culture. But again, his absolute passion for the product to be the best in the world was, you had to be part of that. Otherwise, don't be there. By the way, it's funny, we're talking about the product. I mentioned earlier that one question we always asked in an interview is, how do you like the Mac, or how do you like the Apple II, when it was the Apple II days, to the new applicant? If they never used one, lots of luck. We're not interested in using an employee. We want people that are using our product. In fact, I would be pretty upset being the head of General Motors and look out in the parking lot, and 75% of the cars weren't General Motors. They were a Japanese car. I mean, that has to be the whole culture and a whole part of it, and that's really important.
Thanks.
Yeah, Jay, I would just add, I agree with your point there. I would also add the importance of the board of directors. The board of directors has to be on, because you're talking about major investments, high risk, and the board has got to understand. I spent a lot of my time trying to educate the board on the importance, the criticality of superior products in the marketplace. And that whole thing, the company structure and the board of directors, is pivotal to really being successful.
Well,
That's very good, Gordon. That's an incredible point. The reason that Steve Jobs got thrown out of Apple is because the board of directors agreed with John Scully that he wasn't the right person. I mean, it's ridiculous, because they didn't. Remember, they decided not to approve the Super Bowl ad that was so focused for Apple, and the board of directors just approved it. So Steve and Steve Wozniak put in their own money, but the board didn't approve it. And you're exactly right. The board isn't behind you. Lots of luck.
well, let's keep building on that. In your book, Gordon, you talk about the product superiority as a system, not a lucky event. And you bring up a few organizational mechanisms such as talent, targets, recognition, governance, funding. And you are famous for one particular change in the 90s. Would you like to talk about that?
One particular change?
Yeah, with the people, the promotion
Well,
and system and
what you
curriculum.
realize is the most important. Well, you need great innovators. You need great people. And what I realized early on was the most important thing to a technologist is peer recognition. That is, being recognized as you're among the best at whatever you do. Well, at Procter and Gamble at that time, we never had any recognition of employees, superior performance of employees outside of managers. And so if you were, let's say, a R&D innovator and you wanted to do that as your career, you never would get public recognition. You could get paid, you would get paid. You couldn't wear your paycheck on your forehead. And yet I realized that. And so I said we needed a system where we could very clearly recognize our top performers in innovation. And we created a society. I got support from my boss to do it, and we created a very big event. We honored our top achievers. We named it the Victor Mills Society, which was after the greatest inventor at Procter and Gamble in the past. And we pulled everybody together. We had a big award ceremony, a gold medal. It changed the whole system. It's just inspiring to our people. And interesting, I thought when we did that, I would get a lot of grief from the other functions, manufacturing, advertising, about trying to get rewards for R&D people. Well, quite the opposite. They were very supportive. And subsequent to that, the company throughout its functions has created top societies to honor the best they had in their activities. So it really changed in a major way Procter's approach to rewarding people.
Well, Jay, Steve Jobs is famous for first finding and screening very talented people, but then getting the absolute most out of them, their best work, their most commitment. What were the things that were unique to him that you saw that allowed that to happen?
Well, I think part of what Gordon just said is that rewarding people. He was very openly. The culture was critical, and the culture was. We had a term we called pirates, not the Navy. We actually built a culture and defined it. And basically, we had an award called the Pirate Award, which was basically, and that was actually we rewarded people everything. By the way, the other thing was very important in Apple. It was from end to end. The product wasn't just the product. It was all the way to manufacturing it, to packaging it. The whole product was the whole thing. So when a customer got that box in their hand and opened it up, it was the whole experience of that. The other thing we had in place, by the way, we don't want an owner's manual. We don't want when you open up the box, we want you to be able to start using the product. People all the way across the board, from manufacturing to market. Steve was very open, and it was an open thing about we would reward people on the spot. I mean, somebody came up, just at that moment, we would have a system in place. Also, the biggest award ultimately, when the first Mac was actually manufactured and introduced to the market, and inside the back cover was embossed on the plastic all the signatures of all the employees that built it. So there were 100 signatures on the back cover inside of it with everybody that was involved in building the product. So that's why it was a day-to-day thing. It was the rewards, but also the other side of it, we talked about failures. When we had ideas or bad ideas, we just didn't say, hey, that's a bad idea. We discussed it and just make sure that we understood bad ideas actually lead to good ideas. And actually, we really used that focus of taking a bad idea, which would lead to a good idea. And so that was other the ways, but rewards were, now Steve unfortunately was too rewarded in some cases, handing out stock. Also his partner, by the way, Steve Wozniak, handed out most of his stock all the time, but it's like, so people were rewarded. Obviously stock was a big part of it. And that was a big reward. So it was actually almost a weekly thing of finding something to reward people for. Very important process in the culture.
Mm-hmm. And in your book, you talk about the power of small teams as well. Is that sort of like a secret sauce for getting a great cohesion and passion?
Yes, absolutely. See, small teams, but again, you have to be able to put the team together, small teams, but they have to be also communicated with each other. So you have to make sure the teams know what the other teams are sort of doing. And so we would have meetings, we would have monthly meetings of all the teams, all the way from manufacturing to marketing to product development, to make sure the teams also knew what the other teams were doing. Also, when you have a culture that's so innovative, one of the parts of the culture can't be as in, like manufacturing is it has to be done. You have to build a process. You can't change it much, and so you have to make sure everybody understands the whole process, and that's why the team culture was very important. But small teams were very critical. We always even facilities. We never wanted a facility more than 100 people, so we didn't want a huge office building. We wanted small organizations to think small but think big out of that organization. So we purposely kept things very small, and even in where people met and where people were, we try to keep every focus is be small but be very innovative. Knowing that you're so when I started Apple, we were doing about $2 million in revenue. When I left 5 years later, they were doing almost $3 billion. We had a goal, and it was very known. We would hit $1 billion in revenue with only 5,000 employees. The reason we had that goal was at that rate, we would be twice as productive as IBM. It was a sort of a thing against IBM. So we did it. We hit $1 billion in revenue with less than 5,000 employees. So you just have to have a mindset of what you're going to do and knowing what you're going to do with it. Anyway.
I want to remind the audience that the Q&A button is at the bottom of your screen. So send in some questions, and we'll get to them when we can. I'll keep going. So
let me, Stuart, let me comment on the team thing, because I understand fully what Jay's saying about small teams. We just had great results on our venture team when we had on Swiffer and Febreze and White Strips and so on. Small teams doing big things, but on the other side of it, we made some great progress when we went to world teams. For example, in laundry, where we sell laundry products all over the world. The machines are different between Japan and Latin America, and we have hand wash. So it took us forever to develop a technology in detergents because we were doing it in all segmented areas, and so we went to global teams on in things like laundry and like hair care. And all of a sudden we could bring our researchers from all these areas working on one big technology. Well, it gave us breakthroughs in laundry and hair care. So that was right for that point in time. So I would just offer the point that in a huge structure where you've got products all over the world, where the consumer needs are different, the habits and practices are different. You had to get that group together to develop products that could sustain the needs of all those areas.
Great, thanks, Gordon. So one of the things
that's a very interesting point, by the way, because
go ahead.
Let me just comment that the same problem we had at Apple was the international part of it, because we actually made sure that the Apple organizations outside the United States were the same as inside the United States. So we actually took a different approach. So the offices in France or London or Japan were the same kind of culture of people working together innovatively as they were in California. So we actually took a different approach, but we had teams all over and we actually had a lot of teams already like that, but we made them very carefully integrated into our culture. It took a sort of a different view of it, but he's right. I mean, you have to make the internationals very critical.
Right. We have a question coming in about how can marketing experts urge their product teams, tech and CTOs to push their innovation? Gordon, you have a wow story I've heard you tell.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a good place for it.
Give me the question again, Stuart.
How can marketing experts urge their product teams, both the tech and the CTOs, to push their innovation? It says every market seems crowded. No matter how great the marketing is, the product itself needs to live up to the creativity of the messaging. So they're asking a question about how do you motivate marketing experts to urge their product teams to do their best. So you were talking about that.
Well, I think it deals with the thing. How do you know you have a big idea? How do you know you have an idea that's worth pursuing? And I used what I call the wow concept. I would try to search, we would try to search for a consumer need, an idea, a goal. And when I told you about that goal and what we were going to achieve, you'd say, wow, I want to try that. And of course, when I had a chance to develop a product and give you, you'd say, wow, I want to do that again. So this is a simple thing, but you need to develop a concept, an idea from your consumer work that indicates something that's really going to be meaningful in the marketplace. And when you don't have that and you try to justify it, you say, well, yeah, they didn't quite understand what I was trying to say. Watch out. That's usually indicates that you're going to pursue something that you're not going to be very happy with when you get there.
Also, I think the other thing you have to look at the market when the Macintosh was introduced to the market, IBM was absolutely dominant. They were the number one in the marketplace. So, what was the challenge was how do we get the Mac in there with that dominance of the IBM? Actually, it was my idea. We don't call it a PC. Make sure that we never, in any marketing information, we want the marketers to be very creative in how they're going to address the product, but you can never use the word PC. It needs to be its own product. So Macintosh was introduced as its own thing. And it's another way you want to go to the marketing people and say, here's what's happening also in the marketplace. How do we differentiate our product from the market? I think that's another way to sort of do the same kind of thing. That worked out very well, by the way.
Well, I always get challenged about it, Ron. You say, well, what's most important, the product or the marketing? And, obviously, in my view, the product is essential, but great marketing is truly important to build a great brand. And fortunately, during my 40-year career, I saw a lot of great marketing. Don't squeeze the sharp end, goes on dry to keep you dry. Moisture batters make moisture cakes. All these great insight and absolutely critical to building the brand. So great marketing is really important, but you better have a great product that you're trying to push.
Right. And also, you better be marketing the product. I mean, if you look at all the things going on today in the market, the stuff happening, the product is not there. I mean, my recent example is the CEO of McDonald's did a stupid thing where he was in a thing and he didn't even take a bite of the hamburger. I mean, it was like, and he called it a product. I mean, it's like, this is ridiculous. I mean, the product has to be part of the centerpiece of it, but he's right. Gordon's right. Marketing is incredible, but it's about the product, and the product better be front and center, and all the work messaging that goes on.
Boy, I agree with you, Jay. On the other hand, we might be the minority in today's marketing world for sure. But I think back in the great side-by-side demonstrations we had on Procter products, side by side, whether it was Dawn cutting grease or a Bounty picking up moisture, the side by side, the product performance was really pivotal to building the brand.
Gordon, you talk in your book about an important thing. Say
Also,
you.
it's sort of a point.
Go ahead, Jay. Go ahead.
Let's see. Also, marketing's also part of it, but also, Steve and I went to New York and did a secret shopping. We went to all the computer outlets and they already probably knew what he looked like, but we did a secret shopping. Out of that experience, we determined the Macintosh wasn't being sold properly, and it was in the computer store. We had no control of it. So that's where the idea of an Apple store came out of. So that was 1985, by the way. And actually, I built the first Apple store in 1985. It was the beginning of how do you display the product in a way you control it. And that's the other part of the marketing thing. How do you display the product in the
Oh, Jay, I think you've frozen. Okay. Well, Jay is frozen for the
You're
moment.
used to it.
Yeah. Well, I had a question. Now's a good time for it. So say the team has had their wow moment and they're like, wow, and they're all excited and they want to get started. Almost inevitably with a new idea, you hit something called the Valley of Death, and you talk about that in your book. What is that, and what should teams know about the Valley of Death?
Well, I think it happens on every every major product development, which is you reach a time where you're not quite sure, not maybe very not sure that you can make it. And that's a challenging time. You have people coming at you saying you should shut it down, cut funding, um, not going to make it. And I've gone through quite a few of those and really testy things where you're talking multi-millions of dollars and trying to get through to show that the technology can be successful. And of course, a key one was the breakthrough in paper technology that created Bounty. This was one of the great technologies ever invented at Procter and Gamble. Basically, being able to produce a three-dimensional structure on paper. And these paper plants are huge operations, and we had been struggling. We could do it well in the laboratory, but trying to get it on a major scale was proving to be very difficult. And we had a major session with John Smale, who was the CEO at the time, and John was ready to cut it. He was getting major pressure from the board of directors, um, and we had missed some milestones. We had missed some targets, and so we had a crash down meeting. And that's most of the time that's what happens. You get to a point in time where you're in the valley of death, and death is on one side, and progress is on the other. And I found at that time, you're really betting on the people. You're betting on the people. You're betting on the ability the passion that they have to get to where they need to go. And that was the thing. And I remember on Bounty, the key technologist at that time said to John Smale, John, give us a chance. Give us one more chance. We'll get it done. John said, okay. And of course, that created a major breakthrough in paper technology and some huge brands. But that kind of thing happens in almost every major product development. You're uncertain. You're not quite sure you can get there. And that's where the strength of the technologist to stand up and get it done.
Welcome back,
I
Jay.
think you lost me.
For
I'm back now, I
momentarily,
think.
but
I'm
we
not
see you and
back
hear you
visually.
now.
Okay, good. I can't. All right, great.
We were talking
Something
about
happened.
the valley of death moment where most products go through that. That you got the big idea, you get started, and all things don't look so good. And how do teams deal with the early setbacks they get?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think you have to, again, Steve was very, very good at taking the valleys of death and being able to talk about it. You have to be able to openly, in every part of the organization, be able to say your opinion of what you think is going on. And I think Steve was a way to bring that out of people. And I think that's really important that there has to be in a part of your society, your culture, the ability to bring out bad ideas or be able to look at that thing that wasn't doing well and figure out why isn't it doing well. But it's an open discussion. And I think that's really what's missing out of organizations get too caught up in their channels of operation and then don't communicate what's going on. People are afraid of failure, and can't be afraid of failure because you have to have failure for success. And I think that's one part that Steve really brought into the system, and we brought in at Apple was you can't be afraid of failure, otherwise you're dead. And that's what, even to do something bad, you got to be able to understand it. You're going to move ahead. This isn't the end of it. And I think that's what, if you look at what happened to Steve and the failures he suffered with Next was basically a failure, but he was building a technology that he was able to bring it back to Apple. I mean, Apple today is really Next, and he was able to survive that ultimate failure. And I think, and that's even though you have a lot of money.
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh.
Looks like we're stuck there, Stuart.
We are stuck there. Um,
I was gonna say that, the one thing that we had at Procter and Gamble that really helped this process around the Valley of Death was the ability to try, its ability to test. Um, I can think back on several occasions. For example, on in hair care, we were developing a major technology of two-in-one shampoo, and the decision was made at the general manager level or the senior manager level that we were not going to do it. We're going to kill it. And I sort of went over a couple of heads and went to John Smale and said, John, this is a great product. We got to give it a try. And he allowed us to try. And it turned out to be of ultimately Pantene, the world's largest hair care brand. I think back on Dawn. Dawn was a response to Palmolive's product back in the '60s of superior mildness, and and so we put a team together to develop a product, a surfactant that was milder than Palmolive, and we did. And this was a product that was going to be superior to the mildness on hands. Well, one of our researchers in the laboratory started testing it on different things and tested it on grease. We found out it was miraculous on cutting grease. We went into the advertising people and said, "Hey, we got to sell this on cutting grease." Oh, no, 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 no! It's all about mildness. The consumer wants superior mildness. Well, it got the idea. We'll test it. We'll try it. Well, it turned out to be a huge breakthrough. And Dawn today is the leading dishwashing brand. It still has no no competition, to be honest with you. And incidentally, you see it that it's pretty safe on ducks. It cuts grease on ducks and is mild to the skin. So that's the background on that.
Jay, we have a question that's from the audience that I think was meant for you. How can innovation energy be maintained following the loss of the founder or key innovators? Seems that modern Apple innovation has slowed following Steve's passing.
Well, that's an interesting, good question. I'm not sure you can, but when Steve left, we put in a plan. I put in a plan to make sure that I brought Steve Wozniak and said, when one mentor is killed, you bring in the other one, which was Steve Wozniak. So I was able to bring Steve Wozniak back to Apple to be sort of a mentor of what we were doing, be supportive of the Scully team. But it's very, very difficult. So you got to find who potentially out there. It could be a mentor, or could it be yourself? Could it be whoever? Somebody has to be able to give sort of the similar kind of energy and support. But it's a very, very difficult thing to do. In fact, unfortunately, most companies don't do it. I mean, it could be maybe somebody outside the company. I mean, that's the other thing. You got to find to make sure that you can find somebody that has that spark and that innovation and that passion for the product that can be displayed in a way that you're never going to bring back Steve Jobs. I mean, there's obviously it's going to be almost difficult to find somebody like that. But it's funny though. We were talking about one time the big problem Steve had. He was too young. I mean, nobody believed him. In 1983, he gave a speech in Aspen, Colorado, which I helped write. Basically, he outlined in 1983 the internet, the AI. He talked about where this all was going, and nobody believed him. And then in that audience were people from IBM, Intel, HP, and everybody else. Nobody did anything about it, and because they didn't believe him, he was too young. And that's the other problem with what Steve had. But you got to find somebody that has that. But again, it's a product passion. You got to have somebody that says, "I'm the best user of this product in the world. I know it better than anybody else." And that's
Okay, Jay, you frozen. Well, an audience question for you, Gordon. Oh, Jay, you're back.
I'm put you on my phone because the computers isn't working well. We're having
Okay.
trouble in my area so I'll put you on this will work fine.
Okay. I don't know if you'd finished with your comments about replacing the founder or the innovation energy or the original innovator. You talked
Yeah,
about Wozniak.
I just said it's hard to find that person, but I think that there are people out there that, I thought Jean-Louis Gasset would have been a good replacement for Steve Jobs. He had incredible passion. Eventually, funny, he's the guy that left Apple and had a company called B, which was going to be the next factor into Apple. And then they've discovered Steve Jobs and brought him back to Apple, but displaced Jean-Louis Gasset. But he had a lot of the similar characteristics. I thought he could have been a good leader to come back to Apple. John Sculley was obviously the worst possible. I knew I was dead when Steve Jobs told John Sculley that, in a very heated argument we were having, he said, JLA told me not to hire you. I knew that my tenure at Apple was pretty limited.
Well, we got a question from a P&G alum, so I think this is for you, Gordon. How do you instill an entrepreneurial mindset in product development in companies that frequently base employee rewards on small incremental accomplishments?
Well, thinking small, you're going to get small. I mean, that's about it. Um, I mean, even at Procter and Gamble, you have ups and downs around risk taking and goal setting, and you need leadership, both at the top, but hopefully at the technical organization to reach for big ideas, to demand big ideas. And if the organization senses that you're going to reward small ideas, I guarantee you're going to get small ideas. Um, and that happens. It's happened at Procter and Gamble many times. Um, so you got to keep the focus on big ideas. I remember back in the early 1980s, we were in trouble in a number of fronts, including Tide. Can you imagine losing share on Tide? This was as bad as ivory sinking. I mean, but Unilever came in with two products, Surf detergent and Whisk liquid, and they started taking share away from Tide. And Tide's program was pretty weak. Basically, consumers were getting consumers' clothes are clean enough. We don't really need any breakthrough. That was kind of where it was. So a team was put together. That's when we started World Products, and we came out with Tide liquid and Tide with bleach, two of the biggest innovations in Tide's history, and absolutely turned those things around, including Surf and Whisk being out of business today. So yeah, this idea of focusing on big is is really important, and it can get away from you. So uh, that's that's the job of the top management and the top R&D management to keep in front of the organization.
Well, Jay, I'll give you a question. Moving forward closer today with AI, speed, cross-functional leadership, AI in many ways is collapsing employee descriptions. The clear divisions between marketing and R&D and finance are collapsing with the AI programs. You, More like they are in software. We have a program manager who's kind of wears a lot of different functional hats. Do you see AI making the program manager role more important in the future and adopted more widely?
Absolutely. I think it's going to be critical, but I think that the program manager, the complexity that AI brings, and since it's a messaging system, basically it's there all the time, is going to be very complicated. And I think that level of understanding the kind of messaging is getting out there about your product is very critical, and it's very complicated. Uh, you think about it, we're almost eliminating print words. I mean, to think about the technology we're going through today with AI, we're eliminating all of the channels of communication down to this system, and it's going to be very, very complicated. Um, how do you get a message out that's credible to about your product? It's very, very, very good. So that role, I believe, is even further enhanced by where we are today.
Gordon, if you went to another large CPG company and it was just like P&G in 1985, would you use the same playbook, or were there some things you might be different in today's world?
Well, I kind of fond of the playbook that we use. Um, number one, is people say, well, what's the number one thing you would urge in any other company? Number one, the chief technology officer should report to the CEO. Not only report to the CEO, but should be part of the executive team. Too often, people talk about innovation, but it gets put somewhere in the organization and it is not really a function of the top attention. So that would be the number one thing I would do, would be to make sure that you're realistic about what's going to require to get superior products, and put the accountability with the CTO, and make he or she part of the management system in a major way. That wasn't always true even at Procter and Gamble, and very important. And I see, as I look around the different companies, I see a lot of variation here. The chief technology officer, the person in charge of bringing out the big ideas, is reports to a staff officer, or is not really a part of the executive team. So that's number one I would do. And of course, you have to support him with the right resources. But then, yeah, I would just offer that there's a lot of different ways you can approach the way to go to get products. If you're a small company, you're not going to be able to take on access to ideas as the same way as Procter and Gamble. But if you're a small company, I would advocate, connect and develop. You got to reach out and get ideas from wherever they may exist. If your problem is speed, you're not getting fast enough. World products. Get to a product that can be used everywhere in the world. That changed the whole way. It took us 50 years to get Pampers around the world. When we got to world products and we had to get Pantene around the world, we got it out in less than a year. So when it came to speed, if you've got a large company with a lot of smart people, I did a venture program at Procter and Gamble. I basically solicited ideas from everywhere in the company. If you've got a big idea, come and tell us about it. And we had money to support it, and we created a host of major new brands: Swiffer, Febreze, Acton, Thermacare, White Strips, all these products. Basically, just tapping ideas that we had in our company. Nobody does that. No, near as I can tell, I haven't seen anyone else take that on. So, but it's got major potential. If you've got smart people, you're going to have a lot of people with smart ideas that don't get brought forward and don't get seen. It's risky, but the payoff was amazing.
Yeah, I think that's important. Everywhere in the organization, anybody involved with the product is going to have an idea. And I think you have to be all the way from people who sell it to people who market it to people who build it. There's ideas all the way along the way that you got to be able to tap into. And that's really, really, really critical. Don't ever, they're all have as much passion to get the product to be successful as you do. That's really important.
I wanted to tell a little story, Stuart, about what happened to me just recently.
Please.
I had to undertake a knee operation. I had my left knee replaced. And as I'm sitting down after the operation with my doctor, he's explaining to me how I need to take care of it when I take a shower. And he said, you got to make sure that your dressing and so on doesn't get wet. He said, we've come up with this idea. He said, we urge you to wrap it with press and seal. Press and seal. And I said, doctors, I said, I invented that. So it came around. Needless to say, I got the idea back to the Procter and Gamble and said, hey, here's a great new idea to gain volume. So anyway.
That's great. We had a more than one audience member asked about if you get people the wow moment and they're willing to take risks, the teams are. But not every big idea actually succeeds in the marketplace. So what happens to those people's careers, and how do good teams good companies manage that. When you took us, you swung for a home run and it didn't work out,
Well, hopefully you don't have too many of those,
right?
but certainly every company has those. And I certainly had probably one of the biggest ones in my career was our zero calorie fat, Olestra, one of the great technical inventions in my view of all time. Inventing a molecule that had all the characteristics of fat, but passed through the digestive system in a way to produce no calories. I mean, absolutely super phenomenal technology, but was a failure in the marketplace. Why? Because we chose the wrong strategy to go in. We chose going in with a huge volume potato chip, drove all kinds of criticism and complaints, whereas we should have gone in with an approach to develop a medical pedigree around Olestra to get it really supported as opposed to becoming a place to throw bricks at. But anyway, the people there were outstanding technologists. They were rewarded in the company. We took time to digest what went wrong and learn from it, and talk about it in the company. But you have those, but as I say, you hopefully don't have too many, because if you have a whole lot of them, no matter what you say, isn't going to work. But when you do have them, we had another one with soft baked cookies. We had a great technology producing, a freshly baked cookie that never went away. But went into the market. Nabisco, with its power, just decided to duplicate what we did. We filed patents and won all the patent suits and lost the war. So we have to learn from that. We have to learn from that, and we did. I think you have to realize that if you're going into a new market with a major competitor, you better be prepared for the onslaught of what you're going to get. And as I say, you do have these. In our situation, we would try not to penalize people, because unless they deserve to be penalized, and certainly, choosing the wrong strategy was the choice of a lot of people, including our board. So you try to realize it, try to talk about it, and try to maybe decide what could have been done. So that's what we have to do. The bottom line is, don't get too many of those.
Also, by the way, is that when Steve Jobs returned to Apple, there was a product there called the Newton, which was considered a failure. But however, Newton had very features of it that Steve understood. One was visual, be able to interact with it through visually with the screen. And secondly, it had a demand. The people that actually bought it, but it was a bad product. And it also had a processor in it that could be used. So out of that came the iPhone. So actually, out of a completed failure of a product came the iPhone. And that's interesting. By the way, Steve invited me up to Apple when the iPhone was in development and showed it to me. And I didn't like it because it was too thick. And it had a bulge in the back of it. And I said, Steve, this doesn't feel good in my hand. So he brought in the development team and said, make it thinner. And they said, it can't be done. And he said, I give you 2 weeks to make it thinner. And they came back in 2 weeks and it was thinner. But it came out of a failed product called the Newton. Interesting.
Jay, I was going to ask you, you're really pretty knowledgeable about AI and its effects. What would your advice be to a consumer products company around AI?
I think you need to understand what AI is really delivering to you is incredible productivity, but also is delivering words. So you need to look at what you're going to do with it with words. How do you process it to make sure that in the AI system, your products are being fully accounted for the proper way, because it's about words. And you have to be integrated into your system so people in your company are using it. So everybody gets focused on it. And the AI system you have is focused on what you're doing. Currently, I use AI in my product. So I have a product that I'm trying to stop suicide. I'm a veteran and a farmer. Those are the two big areas of suicide. Using AI, I've actually been been able to design the AI to fit what I'm talking to a veteran, and it talks back to him. So actually, you can customize the AI system to fit what you're doing. And so if you're a consumer product like Procter and Gamble, build an AI system customized to your dialogue is and what you're doing and what your products are. So when people go into that system, they're part of you, and that's really going to be very important to the future. It really is also a huge opportunity, huge feature to what we're doing, and people don't realize that. I mean, you got to get it involved because it is really bringing us the future.
Jay, how can people find your book, and also how can they follow you and what you're doing now?
Well, unfortunately, my book was out of print, so and you
Oh,
only can find it used. You may find used copies of it, but today I have a company called Beehive, Beehavr, Behavior, and they basically Behavior is a company I have that building systems. So they can go on behavior.com is my company. I can be reached at jselliott at Gmail. If you want to get connected, I'm looking for investors or people involved in to help want to stem through it. It's a big issue. Also, we're after the drug abusers, drug and alcohol abusers. We have an app really to all practical purposes, AA on digital AA. AA wouldn't be happy for me to say that, but this is what it is. You create your own AI platform, basically. And I was an alcoholic, so I understand AA very, very well. And so I'm cured, so to speak. And anyway, so that's what I'm doing. But fortunately, my book's out of print.
all right. Thanks, Jay. Gordon, where can people
Mine
get your
isn't.
book? And where can people get your book, Gordon, and how can they follow what you're doing or involved in?
My book's on Amazon. Of course, Amazon makes all the money, but it's on Amazon, and has two versions, hardcover and softcover. And I also have a digital book, and it's a very low cost. So, yeah, if you want to give it a try, it's available.
But also interesting about my book, by the way, it was downloaded into an AI system called Claude. And so
Mhm.
I just won a lawsuit against them for illegally downloading my product into their system. And so I'm just waiting for the payoff for that. But that's exactly the other thing, that pirating books is very, very interesting these days.
Wow. Well, it is rolling right up to 1 o'clock. We are a lunch and learn, so we want to give people back their time. Thank you, audience, for joining us and for the wonderful questions. Thank you, Gordon and Jay, for the amazing wisdom and advice. And with that,
Thank you, Stuart, for your help in getting this
So thank you
underway.
very much. Yeah, thank you. And thanks to P&G. Great company. Great. Thanks, Gordon. You did a great job.
You did too, Jay. Thank you.
all right. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.